Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on the new 90-90-90 with little dollar signs in front of each 90, drugs affordable for all. And I'm very pleased to be able to co-chair this meeting with Simon Barton from the United Kingdom. He's a consultant at Chelsea Westminster and chair of infectious diseases at Imperial College. He's the clinical chair of the Blood and Infection Board for the English National Health Service. My name is Kate Hankins. I'm Deputy Director at the Amsterdam Institute for Global Health and Development and a Professor of Public and Population Health at McGill University. We're going to start right off the top with Andrew Hill. We have a tight schedule with punchy speakers, 8 minutes each, moving through to have a major discussion. So keep your questions and your comments in mind as we move forward. So Andrew is a researcher working on emerging challenges for HIV and HCV treatment programs and international pharmacoeconomics. He is a senior visiting research fellow at Liverpool University. He and I have one thing in common, and that is that Plagne was our PhD supervisor. Andrew.
Thank you. So we heard earlier in the conference that 19.5 million people worldwide are on treatment with antiretrovirals. We can't assume that this is going to carry on year after year. There may be funding cuts on the way if the cuts in PEPFAR and Global Fund allocations go ahead. Also, we have many countries worldwide which are not hitting 90-90-90 targets. You look at middle-income countries outside the voluntary licensing areas in Eastern Europe, in South America, that are nowhere near. So we've got to make sure that drugs are affordable in any country. Also, look at the number of new infections happening in every year versus the number of deaths. We have 1.8 million new people in 2016 who need treatment. So unless we can affect and lower infection rates, the number of people we need to put on treatment is going to keep going up from 30 million in 2017, 32.4 million in 2020, 36.4 million people in 2025. So we need more money to address prevention. In hepatitis C in 2016, 1.5 million people were cured with these new DAAs, direct-acting antiretrovirals, that have extremely high cure rates. However, there were 1.6 million new infections. So if you look on a global level, there are countries in green that are on the way to elimination of hepatitis C, but there are very few of those countries. Egypt, Australia, United States, Spain, a few examples. There are many countries in the world, in fact, most of the countries we looked at are either showing no change in the overall epidemic or it's getting worse. We have to treat more people for hepatitis C, and are we going to get more money to do it? The basis of our calculations were presented yesterday in the main sessions, and I just want to draw your attention to these key numbers for the cost of treatment either in the United States or the global lowest price, which is either from the Global Fund or the Global Drug Facility for TB, or Indian generic suppliers for hepatitis C, and our target price, which is based on how much these drugs fundamentally cost to make. How much does the active pharmaceutical ingredient cost, the API? And what you can see, first of all, is the global lowest price is already quite close to the target price. We're getting to $90 per person per year to treat HIV, $90 to treat hepatitis C, in fact slightly lower than that, a price close to $90 for a 12-week course of treatment for hepatitis C, and a lot less than $90 for first-line treatment of TB. Now, this is an amazing achievement, but it's not being realized in all countries. In fact, we could potentially go even lower than $90 for some of these diseases in the future if we can treat with dolutegravir versus efavirenz, potentially with TAF instead of tenofovir in some countries. But then when you look at the first column, you can see the injustice here. You can see the massive multiples in pricing that you get when the same drugs are being sold in the United States. This is not just true of the United States. You'll get the same price differentials across Northern Europe and South America. In the meantime, you can see the massive amounts of money that have been made by the pharmaceutical companies over the last 15 years. $200 billion in sales of HIV drugs between 2002 and 2016. So any company that says they need these large prices for the drugs to justify research and development, I think needs to really carefully look at how much money they've already made and whether now we say enough is enough. These prices, these charges have become such a burden that we need to look at how can we actually tackle this epidemic and make sure that people in any country have the drugs at a price that can be afforded, both for prevention and for treatment. You look at the same thing for hepatitis C, $49 billion in sales for hepatitis C drugs up to the first quarter of 2017, $61 billion if you look across all the different companies selling hepatitis C drugs. And remember, last year, 1.5 million cures, 1.6 million new infections. Now, generic drugs can be cheap worldwide. Here are the prices of very simple generic drugs made for millions of people. The price of paracetamol, simvastatin, allopurinol, metoclopramide, warfarin. These are drugs at the same price, whether you look at the target price, the price in the United Kingdom, the price in India, the price in South Africa. There is the potential to make drugs cheaply worldwide. And we have drugs which are now generic for HIV. Tenofovir is generic in almost every country worldwide, so is 3TC, so is efavirenz. Now, if we can make paracetamol cheaply, we can make simvastatin, we can make these drugs as well. And if these drugs are generic, like the previous generic drugs I just showed you, there's no reason why this combination, which is the most highly recommended by the World Health Organization, should not be available in any country for $90 per person. There are high-quality generic suppliers for these drugs approved by the World Health Organization and the Food and Drug Administration. Now, if we have this situation where we have unlimited funding, where we have funding for both prevention and HIV, we can get the cost down and we can pay for pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis, treating everybody at any CD4 count, we can get to a situation which I'm lucky enough to have been part of a study of in the middle of London, the 56 Dean Street Centre in the middle of London. They're doing this, and this is the effect they've had on the incidence of HIV, peaking in the middle of 2015 at 72 cases per month. And because of this combination of treating everybody, treating early, post-exposure prophylaxis, pre-exposure prophylaxis, they're down to 15 cases per month. This is the kind of model we could reach if cost of treatment is not an issue, and we can use our funds to fund both prevention and treatment. So just to conclude, the patents on tenofovir and 3TC and efavirenz have already expired in most countries. This combination tablet should be available in any country for $90 per year, and there's no reason why anybody in any high, middle or low-income country should be denied access to treatment because of cost. These are fundamentally very cheap drugs to make. We should then be measuring the value of any new drug, like dolutegravir, versus this $90 price. How much benefit is it really providing? And this could lead to a cascade of price reductions worldwide. The money saved could then be spent on PEP, on PrEP, more HIV testing, and this could drive down HIV incidence. We need to tackle these 1.8 million people being infected worldwide. And finally, for hepatitis C, at the moment, we're in this very difficult situation where some countries are doing well, but for every person cured, we're getting another person infected. This has to change. We have to treat far higher numbers of people, and this is only going to be possible through lower unit prices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for throwing down the gauntlet and setting the stage. You can have a seat, and we'll continue with Margaret. Margaret Heller has come, I think, quite a long way. She's come to us from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, where she's the Deputy Director of Programs at the Burnett Institute and head of the Hepatitis Services in the Department of Infectious Disease at the Alfred Hospital. She's an adjunct professor of infectious diseases epidemiology. She's a principal investigator for a number of world-class studies and is a co-chair of the WHO Strategic and Technical Advisory Committee on HIV and Viral Hepatitis. Margaret's going to speak to us about navigating and negotiating lower prices. Margaret.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I should acknowledge my disclosures. I actually received funding from Gilead Science, AbbVie and BMS for investigator-initiated research, as well as funding through the Australian Government. Today, I'm going to cover cost of pharmaceuticals, how do we get cheaper drugs, just touch on the Australian Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme as an example, looking at price negotiations for drugs internationally and ways forward. The reality is drugs cost money to make, and I don't think we should forget that, and I think it's really important that when we have these conversations that we acknowledge that drugs cost money to make. There's the research and development costs, there's the regulatory costs, there's the distribution costs, there's the marketing and promotion costs, and companies need to make profit because not every drug gets to market. So I think that's important. But as Andrew generally, and I think it's important that people recognise that when he presents that information, he builds profit into those drug prices that he was talking about before. So it's not like companies cannot still make a profit. It's important that they do. But it's how much profit they should be making when at one end of the scale you've got drugs being produced at around $100 or sold for $100 and the other for over $100,000, and what is the value and what is the cost. So how do we get cheaper drugs? There are many ways that we can be working towards cheaper drugs. There's national and subnational purchasing where governments need to negotiate, and in my view they need to negotiate hard. One of the things is that one of the jobs of certain people in companies is to be tough negotiators about price. They get paid a proper and good salary to do that. That is their job. One of the jobs of government should be to negotiate really, really hard about price and not accept the price first offered. And I think often what we have is a lack of negotiation, a lack of governments negotiating as hard as they should with somebody who's professionally, and that's their job, to negotiate a tough price. And the governments used to need all of the weapons that they have at their fingertips, which I'll go into, and not just think, oh, well, that's sort of the price that was offered. There's patent laws, there's TRIPS agreements, there's drugs off patent, there's generics, there's price discounting, and there's the Global Fund. And look, I'll often say at a meeting, oh, the Global Fund is not going to be funding, viral hepatitis therapies or TB therapies or this or that. And I've come to be thinking, how come not? And why are we letting everybody off the hook? Why are we letting these big groups off the hook? So I think it's really important that we don't let anybody off the hook as we talk about drug prices. In Australia, we have, and as many of you would know, a really strong government subsidy scheme called the PBS. And in essence, through an Act of Parliament, drugs are affordable for everybody if they pass through the system. So that's, and in essence, you can pay, if you have a salary, $38.30 a script, no matter how much that drug cost when it got listed on the scheme, or if you are on a benefit card so you don't have a job, $6.20 per script. So it doesn't matter whether that's the new hep C therapies, a new cancer therapy, if it gets listed on that thing, that's what you pay. And also there's a safety net for co-payment. Now, we didn't get this system through, sort of like out of the ether. It was negotiated, it was pushed for. And there's no reason why other countries, particularly developed countries, shouldn't be able to have sensible systems to make sure that you can access drugs. For want of time, I'm not going to go through the details. It is still a somewhat tortuous thing. And this is the other thing that I have noticed as I was reviewing this literature or reviewing and trying to get information about countries and their drugs, is that no system seems to be simple, but it doesn't mean we can't work it. In the United States, where we're told that it's, and when I sent out the email initially, I was told it was incredibly difficult to get information. And you can get price negotiations through the Veterans Affairs, but Medicare was prohibited from negotiating drug prices to get drug prices generally down in the United States. And private insurance companies cannot negotiate prices collectively. But importantly, there are actually two key provisions under the United States laws that would allow for the United States government, if it chose to, so under 28 USC weird squiggle 148, the United States can buy generic versions of these medications at less than 1% of the list price, plus a reasonable royalty. The last time they threatened to do this was when there was the anthrax concerns, and they threatened to do it in regard to ciprofloxacin. And it used to get done much more regularly in the 1950s and 60s. Not done so recently. One could ask, how come not? Similarly, the Bayh-Dole Act, federal government has the authority to seek lower prices for drugs for which discovery began with federal government research support. I cannot imagine that there is a drug in development or currently being sold in the United States that at some stage did not get some support from the NIH. Perhaps I'm wrong there, there might be a few exceptions, but I just think again, why aren't these things being invoked? Norway, it's really convoluted. I decided I'd just put up this slide to say again, and I wonder whether or not it's convoluted just to allow to run protection so that drugs end up being expensive. It was, for want of time, I will not go into the details, and they are supposedly changing this to enable them to be able to negotiate because they're running into problems with rules. So that's the other thing I would be arguing. Why aren't we arguing for simple rules within our country to be able to negotiate lower prices? When you get told this is not possible, then let's have a change of the rules. Spain, it's much more sensible and easier to negotiate a sensible lower price. And you see that in the prices that Spain pays for drugs. So people often ask, how did Australia manage to negotiate the much lower prices for the medication for hepatitis C in Australia? And one of them was that we had a really scary negotiator. And I mean, I'm not scared of a lot of people, but the woman that was leading the negotiations, she was fierce. And I think that's actually a really important thing, that they weren't actually going to take the answer of this is what the drugs cost. The Australian government, through advocacy, persuasion, evidence, had decided that they wanted to have a public health response to hepatitis C, not just treat people with significant liver disease. So although the ISA for drugs is generally set around 40 to 50,000, they said, actually, we're not accepting that price. You need to come back with us with a package where the price comes in lower. It doesn't have to be as low as the vaccine ISA, which is around that 4,000 to 5,000 mark, but it needs to come in much, much better than what we've got. And that was part of the negotiation. And when the Gilead first came and did that negotiation and they set the price, they were rejected. And PBAC, the group that do it, say, no, that's actually not what we requested, and we will hold out until we get a far better price. And Australia did, as a developed country, get a far better price, which has allowed us to have treatment for all. And I think it really needs to be acknowledged that that was a tough negotiation. None of us actually know the final agreement, but what we know is that we probably get treatments for as low as $6,000 to $7,000 a course in a developed world, and I actually think possibly that's not unreasonably initially, that we should be covering the cost, but in my view that profit should be going to make sure that resource-limited countries actually get cheaper drugs. So it shouldn't be going just for nothing, it actually should be so that others get those drugs for a better price. I don't think it hurts that we pay something, but something that's not unreasonable. The cost of PrEP is similarly undergone a negotiation where when initially the drug was put up and was put up again by Gilead, they were told to go away, that we're actually not going to do this for this price, you must come back again. And it is highly likely, though, that what we'll end up is with generics. And the way our governments and our state governments got around it is they said, well, we will provide the drugs as part of trials and we can get generics in because the rules allow us to do that if it's part of trials. So most of our PrEP studies, where large numbers of people are being treated in Australia, probably approximately 10,000 people are on PrEP at the moment in Australia, comes from thinking, how do we get around this curly issue whilst we negotiate the price? And that's what's happening with PrEP at the moment. And so it's a back and forward. But as I said, I think we'll end up, because Truvada is generic, so why can't we have the better price? Or, for me, an essential ingredient of any of what goes on with drug negotiation is community advocacy. One of the reasons I think in Australia we were successful is we have very strong community-based organisations who were in the face of government saying, this is the person who is going to get sick and die, this is the person that's going to potentially pass their infection on to somebody else, this is the person. They presented people. And I know many countries do this, and I don't think we should underestimate the need for it, and I think it's important that we make sure that there is ongoing funding and support for it. And with all of the cuts in global fund funding that is going on at the moment, I think it's really important that we don't forget about the importance of prevention, the importance of having community advocacy and having those groups properly funded to do that work. Otherwise, we will end up in a situation where we will not be able to have the strength and the people doing this key work.
Margaret, you have about 30 seconds
Right.
left.
Other things to consider. Why do we have patent laws? Also, be disruptive. Buyers' clubs work. And in Australia, whilst we were waiting for the drugs to be negotiated and the price to come down, nobody was dying because they were getting treatment through a buyers' club. So, in summary, the cost of pharmaceuticals are often set at high prices, but they don't have to cost that much always. Different countries have different systems, and I think this actually makes it a problem, and also often they're secretive. Systems are essential to promote and treat prevention for all of these medications. In ensuring the drug development continues, it's important that companies make a fair and reasonable profit, but also that we need to keep in mind the basic human rights principles, and we can negotiate cheaper prices because of that. We need our governments to make strong and brave decisions on behalf of their people. I'd like to acknowledge just the people that contributed to these slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I'd love to open up that black box of the negotiations that took place in Australia. Okay, let's move along to hear from Sergei Golovin from the Russian Federation. Sergei's worked in monitoring prices and availability of essential medicines and linking intellectual property issues with the treatment access agenda. He is the intellectual property and access lead at the Treatment Preparedness Coalition in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So he supervises a variety of projects focusing on ways to improve treatment access through community organizations, and has delivered numerous trainings in the field of treatment access for community activists across the globe. Sergei.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. And I have no conflict of interest to disclose, but I would like to thank some of my colleagues from the region for helping me with the presentation. Now, in my work, I sometimes hear from government officials or healthcare providers that basically it's not the domain of patient organization to deal with prices. Price is something set during negotiations between the industry and the government. It's done by professionals, so it's not in the domain of patient organizations. But in fact, in our work, every day we deal with issues such as stockouts, treatment deficit, changes in treatment regimens, and switching to inferior options. And our community-based research shows a very strong link between those problems and high pricing. So no wonder we see so many protests against high prices across the globe. And unless we achieve those 90-90-90, unless we see affordable prices for all, we're going to have those protests over and over again. In the context of limited resources, high prices can make this unaffordable and inaccessible for many patients in need. This is the basic idea for our advocacy efforts in terms of pricing. And of course, we need to define what high is. And for us, high price is any level of price which leads to limited access. So if not all the people in need can afford or can have access to life-saving treatment, then the prices are high and they need to be lowered. Now, we all know that high prices traditionally emerge as a result of monopoly when there is no limited competition. And we all know this history when the price for ARVs came down from $10,000 to less than $100 per patient per year. And thanks to this price decrease, we basically achieved those 19 million people on treatment now. There are several ways in which high prices can limit access. First, of course, it prevents the government from buying the drug itself, and also it prevents the government from buying more drugs for people and covering more people with life-saving treatment. And last but not least, high prices can make governments and patients switch to inferior treatment options based on cost consideration. Another important thing to underline is that pricing policies lead to inequalities in access to treatment geographically, something we cannot really afford. We cannot really afford having some countries in the licensing for essential drugs and some countries outside the licenses if we really need to achieve the 90-90-90. And even within the countries, in the context of in the context of limited budgets, there are discrepancies, and the key populations are usually the first to be left out. This is just some regional examples about inequalities. You see how prices for soft vary in countries of the region, with the price for soft in Russia over $11,000 per 12-week, and the price for soft lead in Kazakhstan proposed at the level of over $20,000 per patient per 12 weeks, which is totally unacceptable. And when I went to this conference, I asked my colleagues in the region to provide me with some burning examples of high prices limiting access to essential medicines. And here you can see examples from Russia and Kazakhstan when we basically have limited access to drugs in the WHO preferred regimens, both for HIV and for Hep C, like drugs like Truvada, all the novel oral DAA-based treatments, sofosbuvir. And even in the EU, I mean, high prices lead to DA treatment rationing due to limited resources. And just one example of Latvia, when the price propositions are over $40,000 per 12 weeks, again, leading to the country denying access to these particular drugs. In situations where high prices prevent the government from buying more drugs, this is the example of lopinavir, ritonavir in Russia and Ukraine, similar situations, limited budgets, large proportion of the budget spent on lopinavir, ritonavir, and achieving generic prices will in fact lead to significant savings and leading to more people on treatment, and that's why the patient community is undertaking actions to actually achieve these price reductions. Again, some situations in Russia when the limited resources and high prices make the government justify the use of inferior treatment due to cost considerations. So how do we tackle high prices? Of course, we need to, first of all, tackle monopolies. And the history, and even the recent history, shows that monopoly basically leads to keeping the prices high. These are the results of the research we undertake in Russia. So basically you see that there are no price reductions for patented drugs. And with generics, you basically see that the drugs do go down. And even this slight increase for the price of lamivudine, zidovudine is basically due to new provisions in the law favoring local production. So this is basically making it monopolistic, so proving again that monopoly leads to higher prices. And another example of how price reduction can lead to improved access is the case of tenofovir, when the price fell down by more than 30 times, allowing to cover 37,000 people by treatment with tenofovir. So we've heard very good examples of how price-volume negotiations can influence price, but also a number of other instruments are in place which are compliant with TRIPS flexibilities, such as compulsory licensing and patent opposition. And basically, our work shows that civil society can play a really vital role here through monitoring of prices, through pushing the government for the implementation of TRIPS flexibilities, for making this issue of high prices being discussed at the level of government bodies and drawing public attention to it. And of course, even making direct actions, and patent oppositions already making impact in some such countries, including the countries of ESEA such as Ukraine, Russia, and Moldova. So some final remarks I want to make is that we have to continue disproving the idea that prices are something to be taken for granted. I mean, and the role of civil society in many cases here is vital, because it is us who need to draw the attention of the stakeholders to the issue of high pricing, because only constant pressure and commitment of all interested parties will help us overcome the high pricing as a major barrier to the 1990. And of course, it's fair to say that pricing is a major, yet it's just one of the barriers to treatment access we need to tackle. And it's important to underline that price decreases and other market interventions for patients, they are surrogate markers. And the ultimate goal for us is to have as many people as possible receiving quality treatment which meets the current standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sergei. You certainly underscored the importance of partnership with civil society in pushing the envelope to get prices down and increase treatment access. Thank you. Our next speaker is Jessica Burry, who is a fellow Canadian but based in Geneva, where she is the HIV/HCV pharmacist at the MSF Access campaign. She completed a BSc in pharmacy at Memorial University in Newfoundland and holds a master's in infectious diseases from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's been an advocate for the access and development of affordable quality medicines, working mainly in the area of HIV and HCV. Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here this afternoon. To start, I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose. So to tell you a little bit about MSF, we're probably best known for our work around the world in almost 70 countries, mainly in conflict zones. But we do have quite a significant number of projects that work in HIV and in chronic infectious diseases. And through the work that's been done by my colleagues in the field in many different countries over 40 plus years, we've struggled a lot with access to medicines in terms of making sure that the medicines we saw in the developed and Western countries were available for the patients we saw in low and middle income countries. Because of this, in 1999, we started the Access campaign, and it's about advocating for better access to the medicines that we don't see because they're either unaffordable, unavailable, or unsuitable for the countries and the projects where we're working. So if we look at advocacy as a means to improving pricing and policy, the first thing you want to look at is what's your problem and what's the goal. So I think you all know this story quite well. Back in early 2000, we had complete unavailability of ARVs to treat patients with HIV because of the high cost of originator products in most countries where they were needed. So almost overnight, because of introduction of generics and because of competition between generic companies, we saw the price reduce, and as my colleagues have said earlier, we've been able to put 19+ million people on treatment. Let me not get too far ahead of myself, because the first-line treatment is down to less than 100 a year, sorry. But if we look at second and third-line options, we're still not there. So there's still plenty of work to do. So if we look at the issues of high prices of ARVs in terms of advocacy, it's a huge picture, and the question begs as to where to start. Do we look at the intellectual property barriers, the suppliers in the market, the competition, and transparency? And they're all important factors to consider. So if we start with intellectual property, one of the things that we do, and this is largely in part of our work in collaboration with other organizations, is to look at the patents and what are actually the barriers, and to do analysis on those and to see if they actually merit the patents and if there are ways that we can do oppositions to work around it. So I talk a lot about HIV, but if we look at the Hep C example of sofosbuvir, we know that it launched at quite a high price in the US market, and we also know that the patents are not really warranted because the product is not innovative and it's based on something that's been in the public domain for many years. If we continue to look at ways to address IP barriers, the TRIPS flexibilities are quite important in assessing how to move forward. And this graph shows that most of the compulsory licenses that have ever been issued are based on HIV medicines. And those are legal and valid options as to ways to address that countries need to use more frequently. Compulsory licenses are something that we just don't see enough of in terms of improving access, particularly in the cases of Hep C and HIV, when you have public health epidemics that can be treated and addressed appropriately. We do fortunately have more and more voluntary licenses, and through the work with the MPP, but we still see compulsory licenses as important for countries that are left outside the territories of the voluntary licenses. When we look at competition and encouraging generics in the market, a lot of the work around advocacy in this area is more or less discussions with companies, trying to engage with different actors in the markets to see how we can improve access, have a sustainable supply, have multiple companies that are ensuring that products are getting to patients. Probably one of the biggest gaps that we have is more around transparency, especially if we consider the transparency around the cost of research and development of medicines. So one of our highlight publications every year is launched at IAS, and it's the Untangling the Web for HIV medicines, and where we've been able to publish the prices and give tools to countries and to organizations to be able to negotiate better, to be able to see what the lower prices could be, to know what your neighbors in countries in the regions are paying, and to enable people to have tools and information to adapt to their context in their countries. In terms of cost of of research and development. We know that it's one of the taglines as to why we have very high prices of originators, but we know there's a lot of questions and a lack of transparency about what the actual cost of R&D is. So back in 2001 was when we had the first launch of Untangling the Web, and it's something that, again, this year we've published, and now we've started to move on to opportunistic infections even to look at what some of the barriers are there. Other means of advocacy, it's not all about the communications with companies and with organizations, but engaging with other civil society, with stakeholders, to make sure that information is available, because that's a huge part of the work. And then sometimes we end up with also public-facing campaigns. We need to engage with civil society and with the public to bring others on board so that they understand exactly what's going on and what these barriers are. So, for example, we had the Novartis campaign that lasted for many years, related to the access to generics in India, whereby originators wanted to, or Novartis in particular, wanted to be able to have extended patents and evergreening, which would have blocked access to medicines. And we know that in MSF, we're treating the majority of our patients with generic products that are coming from India. This continues. Even this past week, there's been trade negotiations in India, and again, we've been following those quite closely to ensure that the message is there, that public health is really the way to go, and it's not all about the patents and the profits, but we need to keep the patients in mind. In South Africa, we continue to work on the patent laws there with our Fix the Patent Law campaign, and again, it's about ensuring access and allowing patients to have access to generics in a country where in fact, many of the products that are still under patent and are still quite highly priced are even off patent in countries like the US or even in the EU. And so if you take a look at our website, there's plenty of different tools that are available for folks to use for advocacy and for improving access and reducing prices. And all that to say, the problems that we've seen probably in the past few years have brought to light to high-income countries and more developed countries that the problems that we've seen as MSF for many years in low and middle-income countries. And so the problems of the global south are now meeting the same in the north. And we've heard plenty this week about lack of access to Hep C medicines and some HIV medicines, the high prices that we're seeing in high-income countries now, and price and access is relative, so depending on the country that we're working in. So I think we need to continue to engage as all the different stakeholders, as all the different players, as civil society, and to engage with companies, with generic companies and with originators to make medicines available and to improve access for all patients with HIV and Hep C. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and you kept precisely to time. So we've had 4 talks. We had Andrew talking about how to achieve access prices. We've had Margaret talking about navigating and negotiating lower prices. Sergei talked about how pricing can improve access to treatment, and Jessica's just spoken to us about advocacy and how it can influence pricing policy. We're now going to hear from industry, and the first person to speak will be Manuel Gonzalez, who I got to know through the IAS Industry Liaison Forum, and I don't even see this mentioned in your bio. He is head of external affairs and communications. He joined GSK in 1984 as medical and regulatory affairs director in Portugal and gained significant experience in working with members of the government and local community on market access, healthcare policy, and industry reputation while running the commercial business included in the HIV product portfolio. He was the VP and general manager of GSK's pharmaceuticals business in Portugal from 1997. He was a member of the team that created Vive Healthcare and became executive vice president of the company at its creation in November 2009. And Manuel's going to speak about how pharma are responding to the challenge. Manuel.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Margaret. My conflicts of interest, I'm an employee of a pharma company, as Margaret said, and I'm on the board of a public university where we have 17 faculties that receive funding from several industries, from avionics to electronics, including pharma also. Several times in this Congress, the figures of people who are currently on therapy were updated to 19.5 million people that today are receiving life-saving antiretroviral therapy, and also, it was mentioned by Andrew here and other speakers throughout the Congress that the lowest price for a generic WHO recommended first-line regimen is under $100 per patient per year. This means a 100-fold decrease versus 2000. In 2015, the number of people starting HIV treatment surpassed the number of new infections in Africa for the first time, and since 2010, the number of people receiving antiretroviral therapy has more than doubled. It's important that we look at the past because the last 16 years, and those of us who were in Durban last year were able to share what has been the progresses since Durban 2000 to Durban 2016. Over the last 16 years, the picture of the epidemic has been transformed from a very bleak one in 2000 to one of hope. And this was due to a potent combination of unprecedented commitment, funding, and multi-level stakeholder collaboration from global actors. We have to remind that Global Fund, PEPFAR, were created on the decade of 2000. There was also a dramatic reduction in ARV prices that was coupled with an upscaling of the pharmaceutical industry access programs. But we should not forget also that was a decade and a half of strong research and development of new ARVs and medical innovation. And I have to concur with Sergei that the biggest driver of this progress was the advocacy of people living with HIV that forced governments, forced the pharmaceutical industry, forced the research, the universities and the academia to concentrate on the objective of providing global access to everyone that needs it. I'm asked to talk about what was the response of the pharmaceutical industry. What I can say is over the last years, the pharmaceutical industry has significantly increased its access programs. Today, most companies producing innovative ARVs have either license agreements with generic companies or with the medicines patent pool. The license agreements of pharma companies with the medicines patent pool include the majority of the most frequently used ARVs in the world, and they have a very wide geographic reach, including most research-limited countries. As of December 2016, by the last report of the MPP, generic companies sub-licensed by the MPP had delivered close to 5 billion doses of HIV medicines to 131 countries. As the program that I know better is the one of my company, I'll provide some highlights of what we do in VIV. In VIV, our access to medicines approach covers all low-income countries, least developed countries, low and middle-income countries, and all of sub-Saharan countries, irrespective of their level of income. 139 countries in total. We do this through a variety of approaches, but the one that is truly relevant from our point of view is our voluntary license strategy. We provide voluntary license to antiretrovirals that have IP for pediatric formulations that cover 121 countries, and for adult formulations that cover 92 countries. With this, we cover countries where live more than 99% of the children currently living with HIV and 94% of the adults currently living with HIV by the assessment that the Medicines Patent Pool made of the current epidemic. In order to accelerate access to generic formulations of our ARVs in research-limited settings, we also developed a partnership with the Clinton Health Access Initiative to provide support and advice to a generic company that throughout the development and regulatory submission of their formulation of generic dolutegravir. And in September 2016, the FDA provided the tentative approval for this formulation only 3 years after the approval of the original formulation. This has enabled supply, and you've seen today there was a symposium from CHAI. This morning there were other meetings from WHO. This has enabled the supply of a generic formulation of dolutegravir in 3 African countries that started last month in Kenya. Something that our partners were very clear in telling us was that it's not enough to provide licenses. We need also to register our products in order to enable generic companies to have a quick access to the market. So by June 2017, we had registered dolutegravir in 80 middle-income countries, including 34 African countries, and our ambition is to register in any country that will have a regulatory authority that will accept registrations for our drugs. Great progresses were achieved since 2000, but as Andrew said and others in the table, we are only with the glass either half full or half empty, however you like to see it. Access needs to be increased. To achieve the UNAIDS 1990 targets, probably 19 or 20 million people need to be included in treatment. Every stakeholder has to do his part. The industry, we in VIV, we are prepared to play with all actors because we know that no one will be able to find a solution for global access. But we also must not forget, although this is not what is being asked from me as a contribution of the industry, but it's something that I'm very keen of and very much involved, we should not forget that key populations are today marginalized, even in countries where universal access exists, and that the stigma and discrimination that affects those populations is also, as one of my previous colleagues in the table said, is also a strong barrier to achieve global access. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. Our last speaker in this formal section of the meeting today is Helmi Sherin. He has 35 years of professional experience in the pharmaceutical industry, including as CEO of Farco Corporation, a board member of Batterjee Pharmaceuticals, and of Presidio Pharmaceuticals. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from the Faculty of Pharmacy at Alexandria University and an MBA and doctorate in Business Administration from the Arab Academy for Science and Technology. He is a board member of a number of educational institutions, including Alexandria University and the Egypt-Japan University, and he's a founding member of North Coast University. He's going to speak to us on how generic companies can upscale treatment affordably instead of cheaply. That's intriguing.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Conflict of interest. I'm the CEO of Farco, producing HCV medicine, shareholder in Prime Pharma with Health Tour and Cure program, board member of Presidio USA, which has research in HCV drugs. When I got the title, How Generic Companies Can Upscale Treatment Cheaply, I sent an email to change the title to Affordably instead of Cheaply, and how we reached this. But it gave me a good clue to think, what's the difference between affordability and cheap quality product? Today I'm going to tell you the story of Amina, an Egyptian lady. You can look at her eyes. And 3 years ago, when I met my dear friend Raymond Shinazi, who was born in Alexandria, my same country, and we shared the same school, we calculated how many Egyptians have this burden. And if you say it was set 10% to 14% by that time, now it's less than that. We calculated something like $1 trillion to cure Egypt. But now, instead of being the highest burden in the universe, to be the first to treat all waiting lists, from the 1.5 million cured, as Hill said, 1 million was from Egypt. Around 70 million people living with HCV worldwide. 700,000 people dies a year, so every 45 seconds we have a mortality. So if I speak for 8 minutes, this means 10 people go to heaven while we're speaking here. 80% of the HCV burden is in the low and middle income countries. So what about Egypt? Egypt, as I said, it's the highest rate with 150 newcomers every year. The genotype 4 is more than 90% and genotype 1 is the 10%. So how can we create the rules of the game? I heard it from Gary Hamel for Competing for the Future in 1995. Who will create the rules of the game? Who will create the things for the future? So if the right people come together, we can do miracles. So we have the 4 Ds, the doctors, the drugs, the diagnostics, and the dorms. So we added discoveries, diplomats, and donors. So we start with discoveries. When we checked the patency for sofosbuvir in Egypt, it was in the public domain more than the time, so it was not offered in Egypt. Yet the process and the polymorph was still pending, so we made our own polymorph shape alpha and our patented non-proprietary process for producing with an enzymatic process. We also acquired 61.5% of Presidio, company producing Ravidasvir, which is an S5A inhibitor. It's in San Francisco. We made a clinical trial in Egypt for 300 patients, and we was a late breaker for an oral presentation at the AASLD on 2015 in front of 6,000 colleagues and doctors. And we are now making another clinical trial for pangenotypic study together with the NDI in Malaysia and Thailand. I visited WHO 20 times in the 3 past years, and we applied for pre-qualification. We had successful bioequivalence, and we had the inspection done, so we are waiting for PQ soon. We also worked with MPP, the Medicines Patent Pool, for licensing out for our territory for Ravidasvir for some countries and also for the NDI. Last month, we got the acceptance of the ERP for the Global Fund, and we work with MSF, and we got contacts with CHAI and other areas. When we made the cost affordable in Egypt and the government was treating most of the people, the diagnostics went up high. So we also interfered and got a very good bargain with a lab with 160 offices or destinations in Egypt for 25 euros for the whole pack for 6 months, including 3 PCRs and 11 tests got skipped, alpha-fetoprotein and others. So we made it controllable so that we can make it happen. So also we started helping in diagnosis and screening. This year, the president of Egypt, after he wanted to cure 1 million and said we did it, we said we have to screen 30 million Egyptians in the coming 2017-2018. So FARCO provided 8 mobile clinics screening 4 million people this year. So we go to an industrial area, all the people, all the workers are being screened, and if this is in collaboration with MOH also. So regarding the drugs, when we started getting an offer for sofosbuvir, it was $1 million a kilogram. When we started making it, we made the first 10 kilograms for $1,050,000. Now we got far below $5,000. I'm not going to tell Andrew Hill what's my cost. We have a drug master file, we have a GMP certificate, and we have 2 premises producing it, one in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh and one in Alexandria, Egypt. For the finished dosage, we had site inspection from WHO, we had site inspection from MSF, and we have PICs because we export to Romania since 20 years now. And our BE was approved. The dorms. Egypt had some hepatitis centers. They increased them to be 135 centers, plus the army is donating 100 centers also for this, plus the private clinics and the mobile clinics. When we were at the easel, we find people protesting for finding the drugs. So we thought of diplomats like Daniel Alves and Leo Messi just to get awareness and making it happen that people can know about that. We built a factory in 2 years with Italian technology to produce API, and this is our finished dosage form. And this is in Camp Nou in Spain with Daniel Alves. And this is awareness campaign from Leo Messi.
And won some more. He scored 102 goals with his team's help. He had Matteo, his second son, went around the world in just 64 days for a cause. Got a bunch of titles, got injured, treated, and healed. And in the meantime, Melanie has been waiting. Just like 100 million people forced to wait over 2 years to start their cure from hepatitis C.
Todo lo que he conseguido en estos últimos 2 años no significa nada si entre todos no podemos cambiar la vida de Melanie y de mucho más como eso. Nadie debería esperar por un tratamiento.
So we're thinking how to stop the wait. Now we have also the National Committee for HCV, so when we make screening, everybody is on a database so that no duplicates in receiving the medicine. And also we have donors. The President of Egypt made Tahya Masr or Viva Fund, and it is supplying the drugs for free for the people. So we have 88% governmental support and 12% private sector. And as we said, 1 million people was cured, and now we are making 30 million screening this year with the help of the government and the army. So if we have a perfect strategy and the head of the state is really taking this as a national program, and you have harmonization between all different shareholders or stakeholders, and you can make affordable treatment, it can happen.
You have about 30 seconds left.
When I met the New York Times auditor 2 years ago, he couldn't think that this can happen in Egypt. Our prices in the coming years, we have Farco's plan to supply affordable direct antivirals for low and medium income countries. We start with $270 for the full cure. We will reach $80, and for medium and medium countries, it will reach $200. So that's the last slide. That's the story of the third lady. We started with Amina and then Melanie. This, when I started taking training, I saw a film called No Margin for Error in Pharmaceuticals. And he talked about a little girl called Susan, that her medicine either to save her life or she can pass away. And he said at this crossing, many people died for years. Some people shook their head and said it's fate, till someone came and built an overpass, and now no one dies here anymore. Thank you, and health for you all.
Thanks very much, Elmi. Firstly, thanks to the organisers who've put together a panel who accepted the challenge of their talks. We now want to open it out to your questions and comments. I've heard here everybody saying that what they want, I think, is the same thing. They want the individual who needs the therapy to benefit fully from it. They want the clinician to be able to prescribe it according to the right clinical indications and the right monitoring, and they want the healthcare system to be able to make that available. I've heard everybody wanting the same thing, but we'll take questions, but before we finish, I'm going to ask each member of the panel, so you can start thinking about this, to tell us one thing that they can do and one thing that somebody else on the panel or sitting in the audience can do, which would begin to process further and faster all the achievements that we've heard so far. So please start thinking, panel, and we'll take the first question from the microphone. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Marijn de Jong from the Dutch AIDS Foundation, AIDS Fonds. Thank you so much for the great presentations. It was really a nice panel with a lot of stakeholders. We got the governments and the pharmaceutical companies, the community organizations, civil societies, and the NGOs. But here we are at a scientific conference. Aren't we missing someone? Aren't we missing the scientists, the academic researchers? In this conference, I've heard many clinical trials, many academic scientists contributing in a partnership with the pharmaceutical companies. So isn't it time that they also are taking their responsibility in this partnership to ensure access to medicine and reasonable pricing?
So expand a little and tell us what you'd like to see the academic scientists doing.
Well, first of all, everyone is an advocate, so I would love them to take their role as an advocate in the conversation with the scientist. Perhaps they can negotiate that the products they work on, that they can be accessible for reasonable pricing. It's a partnership, right?
I think you're right. I mean, there's a wonderful book written about the history of HIV in the 80s in the UK by Virginia Berridge, where the alliance between the right politician, and it wasn't Margaret Thatcher, the right scientists with the research drive and the clinicians and the advocacy of patients that moved the government and moved public opinion so radically. So you're right, I fully agree. There is that partnership. Pharma have a role to play in that, but often my experience of pharma companies as a researcher is that the R&D part is kept very separate from what comes later, and it is difficult to put that together for rightful governance reasons. There has to be separation, but it is an important point you raise. Do any of the panelists? Yeah, Margaret.
Can I ask one more thing? We shouldn't accept the system, right? The system can change.
We are here. This is part of the change. You've said it.
First, I'm slightly mortified that I'm not thought of as an academic researcher, but apart from that tremendous unhappiness that will sit with me for the rest of the next 2.5 minutes, I think that was one of the successes in Australia, that in fact we did have a combination of academic researchers, implementation scientists, clinicians, advocates, so the community-based organisations. There was a parliamentary roundtable where somebody like me, who's an epidemiologist, clinician, public health physician, was presenting the available evidence as to what we needed to do if we were going to have an elimination strategy, as opposed to just treating people with significant disease. Not all of my colleagues at the time were necessarily agreeing with my view on this, and some of them were very annoyed at me on occasions and made their annoyance clear. But to me, that's what, you know, a number of us decided we were going to go forward with, and made sure that the community-based organisations had that evidence as well, because to me community is important because they have individuals to put in front of a government minister. You need to convince a government minister that they could be a hero here, in my view, and that this is going to be their thing. You do need the science, but you need the right people to be presenting the science as well as yourself. And then you need to try and bring others on that journey with you who may not necessarily be agreeing with you. And the other thing you needed to do, or we were able to do, is go, there are these other ways that nobody is dying of stage 4 liver disease, because that's where my colleagues were not necessarily happy with my attitude of keep the negotiations going until we get that price, where it's treatment for all at the lower price, as opposed to just people with stage 3 or 4 liver disease. We had other avenues, disruptive perhaps, so buyers clubs, special access schemes and the like. So nobody was dying, so we could afford to say, keep up the negotiations and be quietly supporting people doing that. So I do think you need the evidence, you need the models and all of those things. So yeah, I think you're right, combination.
Helmi.
I have 2 points. First, I thanked very much Raymond Shenazi, the discoverer of sofosbuvir, and I said he was my inspirer, and all Egypt is thanking him for what he did. Second, when we bought 61.5% of Presidio, the first thing we did, we signed with MPP and DNDi to offer it for low and medium income countries even before the drug was registered. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll take another question. I think we've got 4 people waiting. Yep, and then we'll let Sergei in a second. Yep. Okay,
thank you. My name is Tapio Kujinga. I'm from Zimbabwe. I just wanted to flag, that, in my part of the world, the HCV burden has not really been mapped. So we really don't know how many people are living with HCV. We had a rapid assessment in Zimbabwe just a couple of weeks ago, and some healthcare providers don't even know about hepatitis C, how it's treated and symptoms and stuff like that. So I just wanted to raise that. But my question goes to Helmi. You mentioned that you are creating a pan-genotypic therapy for HCV. What are the components? What are the component drugs? Just for
sofosbuvir and ravidasvir, which is an NS5A inhibitor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so another question then, Sergei. Yep.
Hi, my name is Tracy Swan from New York. I want to thank all the panelists for your excellent talk. There's another group that's most notably missing from this panel, donors. And I would like to ask any panelist bold enough to answer, what would you say to a donor? What is the most convincing thing to get some money into hepatitis C? Thank you.
Okay, Sergei, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I was probably
absolutely.
Yeah, just wanted to address the previous question, basically about research, and basically that the advocacy around pricing, the advocacy around driving the prices down is is indeed based on thorough research, such as the one conducted by Dr. Andrew Hill, research conducted by community organizations looking at the level of prices in different countries. So yes, it's really a combination of research and advocacy, which is really important. Yeah, about the donors, I think maybe someone else.
Yeah, I mean, okay. You
I'll
okay, Jessica.
Trade into that one.
Yeah.
I guess for me, the donors and the political will that was brought up earlier, they go hand in hand. And we've seen that in countries where there is political will, like in Australia and in Egypt, that we've seen that things move quickly and can progress. And so if we have the will from the countries to put the funds forward, then we're seeing people getting treated. But we also need to look at the donors some that have been at least willing to come forward and put a foot into it, looking at the HIV co-infected population, but it's not enough. I think we have to consider that we're at a revolutionary point in Hep C where for several years now we've had a treatment available that you can cure people within 12 weeks, and it's not acceptable that we sit back and let donors walk away. And in a time when funds are reducing and we're really having to cut corners and to look around and see how to best use the funds that we have, a cure is far and beyond the best way that you can take care of your patient population. And whether they're HIV co-infected, if they're Hep C mono-infected, those patients do need the care, and there's no excuse for not funding when we have a 12 weeks treatment to cure people.
Okay, that's clear what you're saying to a donor. Anybody else? Andrew, what don't you say to a potential donor?
I think the donors need to understand just how cheaply these drugs can be made. I think it's a big misunderstanding. I think Gilead's been saying we'll provide a cure for hepatitis C in low-income countries for $900. I think we've got to remember that's 10 times what they could cost. I think if the same donors or ministries of health understand that they could cure for $90, it could change the economics considerably. And when I give talks on costs of treatment, I'm amazed how little ministries of health know and how little donors know about quite how cheaply they could treat one of these diseases. If the Egyptian diagnostic system cost €25 and the treatment cost $90, you're talking about just over $100 to cure somebody. And they hear these stories about $84,000 in the US, and it might just completely put them off. They might say, well, there's no way we could treat this. They need to understand how cheap it is.
I think, Margaret, in your presentation, you started putting up comparative issues from different countries. Getting hold of that information is a very complex and difficult thing to do.
Yes, and so some of us will try to continue to do that. So I think I agree with Andrew's point. I think one of the most negative things about that $1,000 a pill is that people think that's the current price of treatment. And it was the price of treatment, but for a moment and only for a very small proportion of people. But it's something that is sticking in people's head. And I actually think one of our most important tasks we have to do is reframe the whole, say, for hepatitis C. But often for these things, it's going to be $150 a package of cure. And so we need to get that clear in people's heads. And I think it was a piece of marketing which has done not just Gilead, to be perfectly honest, but I think everybody a grave disservice. It was very successful because we all remember it, but it's actually meant that we're remembering the wrong thing. And I think to make us learn the right thing is a really important thing for donors.
Thank you. You've waited very patiently, sir.
Yes, my name is Halim El Gadari. I'm coming from Morocco, and I have a question for Manuel Gonzalez. It's about my neighbor, Algeria. I would like to know your voluntary lessons to the MPP on DTG, authorized supply to all African countries except one, Algeria. Then we don't understand why you exclude Algeria. And I would like to know now if you commit here to integrate Algeria for DTG.
Thank you very much for the question. This was addressed yesterday with ITPC, and so I have no problems in discussing this. Algeria is the only non-sub-Saharan African country that is upper middle income. As I explained to you, to the audience, our licensing strategy covers low income, least developed, lower middle income. On countries like Algeria, we are prepared to sit down with governments and to discuss a solution. That can be a local license, but Algeria has, and I don't know if you are aware, has a catch-22 situation. You can only register a product if the product is included in the guidelines. So the guidelines never include a product that is not registered. So the question about the DTG is, and I spoke with Ottoman yesterday about that, so I can share with you, if you help us to find a solution to register dolutegravir in Algeria, I can guarantee you that we'll sit down with the government of Algeria and we'll find a solution that will be suitable for Algeria and for us.
Thank you. So, Sergei, you wanted to come in. Do you want to give some advice about activism for those, such as in Algeria, where they're looking to influence the price of drug as well?
Well, I'm sure the ITPC MENA and the Algerian activists, they know the local context better than I do, so they know the right approaches. But the one common, I think, thing we need to do, addressing your question you asked at the beginning, I think that we have to not only stop the wait, but also stop the silence. I mean, this real issue of access and pricing influences access needs to be discussed much more on a global and on a country level, and it needs to be brought up by activists, by the media, by healthcare providers, etc. So one thing we need to do is we need to speak up more often and at different levels.
Okay. Well, I've got a question which I've been hanging on to, which is about hearing the linkage between HIV and costs of treatment and hepatitis C and being linked together. Do you think that's a helpful linkage in the debate, and whether or not costs of cancer, I mean, Andrew put in costs of other things as well. Where's the best way to move the debate for the whole of pharmaceutical products for high cost, potentially high cost, complex and severe illnesses and conditions? Where would you move the debate to, Andrew?
If we accept that these treatments are fundamentally cheap to make, and you're right, it's true for cancer as well, the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, TB drugs, all governments have limited health budgets, and all governments want to treat as many people as possible. We need a different attitude to economics, and the World Health Organization is very strong on this. We need to get away from value-based pricing. We need to think about governments having a goal for hepatitis, a goal for cancer, eradicate hepatitis, treat as many people with cancer as possible, and then set a target to the pharmaceutical company saying, okay, we want to treat everybody with hepatitis in the United Kingdom. We have this percentage of the health budget to do it. What deal will you give us? Rather than the unit cost is $84,000, we can't afford it, the budget impact is too hard. So we need to start dividing these health budgets into therapeutic allocations and then getting a good deal for everybody. If the drugs are so cheap to make, the drug companies will still make a huge amount of money if they can treat a large number of people at a low price rather than the current situation of treating a small number of people at a high price.
Margaret, do you want to come in?
No, I totally agree with that, and I think that's one of the things is, the countries need to have a strategy. And they also need, my view is they need to make a decision that they're going to do these kinds of things, and they have to be having the political will to do so and then to work out the solution. I think the solutions are there. I also think it's really important, I think, with HIV and viral hepatitis to recognise that maybe one of the reasons these things are slow to move is the stigma. And I think that does play a part in the way people disregard some of these key populations, and I don't think we should forget that. So things like the war on drugs and those kind of ridiculousnesses have been, I think, incredibly unhelpful in making it that sometimes we take sound and evidence-based policy into our response.
Jessica, is that your perspective in MSF as well?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, it's we need to capitalize on the momentum that we've had recently in terms of access to medicines and in the way forward. I mean, it's been the past several months that we've been talking about the UN high-level panel and the access to medicines movement, and so we need to continue to push that political will and to push governments to hold them accountable and to make that access to medicines movement become a reality. And that's not just for HIV and Hep C. I mean, we focus, in this conference, we focus on HIV, Hep C, a little bit of TB, but more broadly, it's quite a general topic that applies across all low, middle, and high-income countries. And so we need to really ensure that governments are being accountable and that they're able to push for promotion of the TRIPS flexibilities and of the transparency that we need to be able to move forward in this agenda.
Okay, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all the speakers for the presentations. My name is Otman Melouk. I'm from the International Treatment Preparedness Coalition, ITPC. I would like to speak about the problem of transparency of prices, and I think Margaret has spoken about the issue of negotiations. And I think it's a big problem. I really appreciate the efforts that MSF are doing in Untangling the Web to try to help us to navigate through this, the work that Sergei is doing. And we are doing some similar work as well, and it's very hard to get this information. So I would like to hear from the panelists how we can make the system a little bit transparent, and I will be interested to hear also from the pharmaceutical industry. I may understand when negotiations are ongoing, these can be secret, but our government are sometimes very lost when it comes to information about pricing. Very often we know better than them, and we try to tell them, hey, you know, this can be available, or this country negotiated this price. So how we can better use laws on access to information or other tools that are available to make the system a little bit more transparent and to help with this negotiation and this monitoring. So I would like to hear about from Margaret, from Jessica, and from the pharmaceutical industry as well, their opinion on that. Thank you.
We will. Was that your question as well? You were. That was your same question. But good. So we got two people asking the same question: transparency. So let's go first with Manuel. Do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I can start. We are not setting the rules when we start negotiations with governments. So governments, they set the rules and decide if they want discussions. We don't have the power to impose to a government to maintain a price that is confidential. And the clear proof of that is the price that we negotiated with a middle-income country, Brazil, that immediately, even before telling us, the day that closed the negotiation with us, called a press conference and a television and disclosed the price. Some governments in Europe decided that they think it's on their best interest to keep the price confidential. Having said that, in Europe there is a reference price basket, so most of the countries know the price of each other's. But on this one, we, the industry, even if we wanted, we don't call the rules. We have to abide by the rules, and the governments have all the liberty. And let's be very clear, even when they sign contracts with us, they say they want to maintain the prices confidentially, they can disclose the prices at their convenience, because we cannot impose anything that will go against local laws, rules, or constitutions. So that's how it works.
Helmi.
I think what Andrew Hill said is very convincing. If you sit down with governments and you cure many people with a better price than small people with a higher price, and this is what we did. And also having the prices for the next coming 13 or 15 years in front of everybody makes everybody see how it's going on. And by the way, for donors, we say $3 a day, keep Pepsi away.
Okay, you've been waiting patiently, sir.
Hi, I'm Alex Wong. I'm an ID doc from Canada. We have a couple of Canadians on the panel, so I want to start by thanking the IAS for convening this great session. And in Canada, we actually have had some success in the sense that we anticipate that hepatitis C medication will become open access in 2018. But I think that some challenges have been that we screwed up, unlike Australia, because all we did was think about the drugs, and we didn't actually think about an implementation strategy to actually get the drugs to all the people that actually need to be treated. So I guess a couple of things that are frustrating that I would encourage. One is that for those in Australia and those in Egypt who are doing this mass elimination strategy in your countries, I think really describing your experience, what's worked, what hasn't worked, how you've been able to roll the drugs out, roll testing out, and so forth, and being able to describe that in a very clear way will really set the stage for all the rest of us moving forward in terms of having some direction. And what frustrates me tremendously is the fact that our government basically operates in silos. So we have a huge drug budget, just like many, many other single-payer countries, but the drug people operate completely separately from the operational people. So while we have these great medications, we have no plan to actually get the medications to everybody. I'd really encourage, and I think it would be a great idea, quite frankly, to have all of our government negotiators somehow collaborate between countries and actually understand, the process by which companies or certain countries like Australia have really been aggressive and successful in negotiating, so that they can work towards the same goal and understand that it's actually possible, as opposed to the value-based pricing strategy.
Okay, we could ask the IAS to call for that. Margaret, you might tell people, because Australia has a strategy, a nationally agreed strategy. How did you get to that rather than the price bit? That's, I think, part of the question.
First of all, I'll say we're doing some things okay, and I'll say, but we're not doing all things okay. So once the government had decided that it was going to be treatment for everybody, that's when, as opposed to we're just going to treat stage 3 or 4, that was a lot of conversation that went into, and none of us actually knew what exactly was going to happen at what they call the PBAC until that ruling came out that actually we want treatment for everybody, that it was to be community-based treatment, that there were not to be restrictions. There's certain things, so that also we had prison-based treatment. None of us actually knew whether we were going to get that. There were people advocating for it, and then when it came out, it was like, whoa, we got everything we were asking for. It was pretty exciting. And I think the point you make about, and one of the points we were saying is we want to stop the bottleneck, so treatment has to come from primary care doctors. So the government, the federal government, we've got a very confusing system, but our federal government essentially said, we've got this block of money, it's going to have cap and all of, I could go into details, but it's got a cap and all the things, but essentially you can write as many scripts as you possibly can for anybody, anywhere, get treatment out there. We're going for, as I said, the minister used the wrong E word, she used eradication. I'm an epidemiologist, amongst other things. It's elimination as a public health threat. But apart from that, that's what they're going for. So that ability to write a script in community, if you're a primary care doc, not a specialist, but with links to the specialist hospital, I think is key for us to be successful. We have also the way testing is allowed in Australia, which is rebated, which means it's not a big cost for somebody, is good. It's not quite right. But they didn't put certain other funding in, so a number of us in our state-based systems then are going for these big elimination programs. We will do our best to make sure we get it right, so we can be used and pointed at as we can have that, and we're very conscious of trying to get it really right so that we're helpful. But it's not a perfect system. I'm really wanting to put that out there. Is we've got it's a bit like Egypt. We've got hope that we can go forward well, but we're not going to be perfect about it, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to hopefully tell you those mistakes as well as the things that worked.
I think the system cap really incentivizes as many treatments as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Really good question. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Jérôme Martin, AIDS activist in France. I'd like to start from Manuel Gonzalez's answer to Othman. When you were talking about the confidentiality between, of the negotiation between the state, the government, and the industry, okay, but we are talking about thousands of people dying everywhere. I mean, what means confidentiality here? We need to have transparency on the real cost to address the issues of the price in France. So that cannot be a good argument. And even in France, where the health budget can afford your excessive prices of the drugs, well, I'm paying the tax of the budget health, so I have the right to see what are your reasons for fixing a price. So confidentiality cannot be a reason for what you understand. And this is a very polite panel, and we are very polite, but I'd like to point out the real opposition, discrepancy between your position and our position. You are talking about confidentiality, but we are talking about people dying.
Thank you. Sergei. Sergei, do you want to come back to that?
I just wanted to...
Sorry, Andrew first.
This is
no, you go ahead.
No, this is a fact. I'm not, I'm not making a judgment on value of the confidentiality or not. I was just mentioning, and it's not, let's be clear, I'm representing the industry here. My personal opinions here and what I think personally, it's something to be put outside. Here, I represent the industry, and what I'm saying is that the facts are these ones. I'm not saying that As a citizen, as myself as a citizen, I have the right to have the opinions on pressuring my government. What I'm saying is not up to the industry. We cannot set the rules. It's not. I cannot say to a government that says that negotiates confidentiality with me that I go against that rule.
So let me just. So Sergei, I want to let you in terms of advocacy in partnership with pharma to change the rules to create a more global approach to negotiation for pharma. What approach would you take to that?
To start with, I think that the situation with transparency around prices differs from region to region, and in the region where we are operating, the prices are transparent. Unfortunately, we have very low access. But in terms of the transparency of prices, we are doing pretty well. And but I would agree that having transparent prices, because it's public money, because these lives of people, is absolutely essential for achieving the targets we have, because we need to know where we're going from. I mean, and if there are treatment access issues, because even with hepatitis, I mean, even with such low prices, I mean, across the globe, the number of people actually treated, I mean, is very low in comparison with the number of people who actually need it. The percentage of people treated in EACA is less than 1%. So yeah, we need to know where we're going from. So transparency around pricing, I would say, is absolutely essential, and we are basing our work in terms of pricing advocacy on the transparency of prices we have.
Okay, thanks. So we'll take the last two questions, and then we'll come right back to the panel. So firstly, sir.
Hi, thanks. My name is Ben Linus. I'm from Boston. I just wanted to come back to this issue of transparency because I feel like we're somewhat missing the entire conversation. I think there's two levels of I think transparency is absolutely essential, because I honestly believe that we could actually rely on market forces to control these prices, but we don't really have a market, right? The first principle of a market is free information, and that's being violated constantly at two levels. First, at the price level, which is what has been mentioned. Make no mistake, in the US, pharmaceutical companies are strategically inserting non-disclosure packs in order to chop up that market and extract the best possible price. And that's a policy that needs to end if we're actually going to bring these costs down. But then also there needs to be transparency at the cost level, right, which is what Dr. Hill has been discussing. Governments need to know that information so that they can enter into negotiation with pharmaceutical companies that's balanced. Without that information, it's just not a negotiation, and the whole system falls down. So I think transparency is absolutely critical. On the flip side, I think there's some onus on us, the HIV or Hep C community, to look at what we're doing and see how we can do things better. So one thing I think is that we do need to abandon this $1,000 a day cost. We tend to sort of talk out of both sides of our mouth, and I'll admit I'm guilty of it as well. Sometimes for advocacy purposes, when we want to make the point that the cost is too high, we show the pill of diamonds and say it's $1,000 a day. But then when we want governments to actually consider the treatment, we point out, no, it's not really $1,000 a day. So I think we just need to admit that the price is too high, but it's not $1,000 a day, and that's just a boogeyman that we have to move away from. And then the last thing is, I think we need to stop coming in first with the hammer of compulsory licenses. It's going to scare away pharmaceutical companies, and frankly, I understand why. I think we need to use the leverage that we have, which is one, transparency if we can get it, and two, the fact that all of the volume is on our side, right? That business model of huge volume, lower cost can work if we get together and leverage the volume to make the negotiated discounts with pharma. And so that's going to take collaboration on our part to come together and negotiate in a group way. It's worked sometimes in the United States, not perfectly, but prices have come down in situations where large buyers are able to negotiate low price for volume. And I think that's a model that we could see work globally as well.
Thank you very much. Beautifully put. Please, sir.
Jorge Saavedra is Healthcare Foundation Mexico. So my question is mainly for the industry. It was also for the donors, but there are no donors here. So because they do like, and you do like, use the World Bank income classification, and that especially the upper middle income classification, that is not exactly reflecting the living standards of people in those countries, especially because it's not the same to be an upper middle income country with an economic growth of 7%, 4%, 3%, than an upper middle income country with an economic growth of -7% in a second year in a row, which is the case of Venezuela. And Venezuela is the worst performing economy in the world according to the IMF, only compared to Syria, maybe to Libya, but no one else is performing worse. So the point is, that country just a month ago, they purchased $13 million in medicines for AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria that will be shipped, or the first shipment will arrive by the end of August, and they will face one entire month of zero stockouts of ARVs. But then they could use those $13 million only also to use affordable toilet paper, affordable rice, affordable eggs, affordable chicken, because they cannot afford that. And it's an upper middle income country. So that classification is really artificial. As soon as you arrive to Caracas, you don't see upper middle income families, not upper middle income people. You see a disaster there. So those kinds of countries, they need donations, not even affordable prices, donations. So I don't know how to balance that, to use the income classification, but combined with situations of economic growth or other kinds of measures.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really good point. So I'm going to go back to the panel. Feel free to respond to either of those two last very powerful points. But if you can, I'd like one thing you can do and one thing that somebody else can do, which could be anyone in the audience, you, No back home, or donors or whoever. So let's start with Andrew.
Okay, so I think for right now, what anybody could do, if you're a doctor and you've got somebody in front of you who's at risk of HIV infection, needs PrEP, but it's not reimbursed in your country, if you've got somebody in front of you who has hepatitis C, but it's a genotype or it's a stage of disease that can't be reimbursed, the buyers clubs are working. You go to I Want PrEP Now, Fix Hep C, there are other ones, we've studied them, they've been working in Australia, they do cure people. Don't be frightened of internet-based medicine, provided you use the right channels. And it means that right now you can get an interim solution. These negotiations are going to take time. But I think it's almost to the situation now where if you don't get somebody internet-based PrEP and they get infected with HIV, or you don't get them DAAs and they get liver cancer or cirrhosis, then have you done the right thing not telling people about that channel? So I think buyers clubs really need to be taken seriously now. We know that the drug's coming through a high quality from WHO-approved suppliers, and we're not getting people infected with HIV, and we are curing over 90% of people with Hep C this way.
Margaret.
Well, just as a comment, as a person who's an incredibly conservative clinician, because I am clinically very conservative, the first time I wrote a script for a buyers club in Australia as I was waiting, I was incredibly nervous. It was not something that was my normal state of clinical well-being, but you just decided that you just had to get on with it. So I would endorse that, and I'll tell you, you won't necessarily, depending on your personality, feel comfortable about it the first time, but you can get yourself over the line. So, okay, from a personal thing, I think one of the jobs, I think, of us in Australia is to, as the speaker said before, to make sure that we do a good job with what we're trying to do with elimination, to provide quality evidence to help other countries go about that. And I don't just necessarily mean high-income countries. I think some of the work we will do, and I think this is the thing that I would be saying, is of that importance of identifying the key population at risk. It varies between places. Making sure that you do test in community and reflex quickly onto treatment will be essential. And so for us to help provide quality information and evidence around how to do that, I think will be our role over the next couple of years. In terms of what I think other people need to do, it'll be a package of care that needs to be offered, which involves identification, testing, treatment, follow-up. And I think that it's really important that people start to think of innovative models for that to happen globally. Not everybody will be able to afford it, so how do we also make sure we don't leave people behind? But how do we fund innovative packages of care in the $100 to $400 US mark for resource-limited countries, and make it that somebody can get a low-interest loan, they can get whatever it is, so that they can get onto that care soon, and that it's not just for people, even in those countries, who have dollars. So to me, that's, I think, our challenge as a community.
Thank you. Sergei.
Thank you. I might be a bit repetitive, but I think, as I've said before, sometimes I think we a bit overestimate the level of awareness about this issue among the global community, not only the community of advocates, healthcare providers, but also the general community. So each and every one of us can continue spreading the message, which is fairly simple, that there is treatment for HIV, there is cure for hepatitis C, and it can be produced cheaply or affordably. But the gap between what we have and what we need to have is like outrageous. I mean, in terms of at least in terms of hepatitis C. So what we need is we need to sit down together and understand how we can close this gap. So spreading this simple message at different events, not only on the World Hepatitis Day, I think it's something which every one of us ought to do.
Thank you, Jessica.
I think I'll go back to the donors and the funding story, because I think we as civil society, as NGOs, as patients and doctors, we need to continue pushing the governments to make funding available so that governments themselves can do the scale up and do the work, but also to enable organizations like Global Fund, like PEPFAR, like UNITAID, in a time when we're seeing plateauing in funding, reductions in funding, countries transitioning. We need to encourage governments to really put the money there to allow us to treat Hep C, which, I mean, like I was saying earlier, it's an easy cure, and to allow us to continue scaling up for HIV.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Manuel.
So, representing the industry, would I say that the industry has done everything? Would I say that the industry has proactively addressed most of things or has done that under pressure? That's the reality. But when I look back, and because I'm much older than most of you, and I was a physician in '84, and I saw probably the first AIDS patients as a physician, and I've been in the industry for more than 30 years, we are much better than we were in the past. I think there is a commitment of the industry. I'm talking about HIV, it's the only industry I know. I think that the industry has shown over the last at least 7, 8 years a willingness to discuss, to collaborate, and I hope that, and I'm pretty sure that from what I saw today, with the continuation of advocacy of people living with HIV, with the commitment of all stakeholders, because I presume that we all have the same interest and the same commitment to people living with HIV, from the industry, I think that the industry will continue to collaborate and will maybe not agree in everything, but will make progress, is what I can say.
Thank you. Helmi.
What we can do is to take 37% of the cake and start making it happen to cure 25.9 million people in the coming 13 years. And we'll try to do our best to get it less and less and less with more people. And also at the same time to make a public health paper on what is happening in Egypt. As I said, in Alexandria, we're screening 4 million people and curing them this year. So I got Faculty of Medicine involved to make this paper so that it could be a good guidance for other countries to do. But what we are there, I say congratulations, we can do it, it's there. What others can do with us is the Buyers Club. We can supply our good quality product for these Buyers Club to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you for treating such a complex and difficult subject with your interest. The panel for taking absolutely this chance to show the values of respect and dialogue and the need to create urgency to speed this up to get the right results, both for public and individual health. And that commitment, I think, is something which the IAS will reflect upon and maybe organise more meetings before the next 2 years to take forward. Thank you all very much indeed.